Okay, headset installation. Actually, combined bearing installation instructions. So, what that involves, two things. One, a wonderful headset on bike, which if you follow my instructions for, basically what you're going to do is take your headset, walk into a bike shop, and say press it into the frame. More detailed explanation of why we're doing this is simply because there is a device called a headset press. Very simple device that is a rod passed through the head tube of the frame, this portion, with cups on either side, and basically a threaded rod. The center is threaded so that basically as you keep on clamping it down, it presses the cups into the frame. Very precise tool is needed instead of just slamming it in, because the alignment is really critical with today's frames. You're off by a little bit. You're essentially forcing something into a frame in a direction, a manner it does not belong. You can end up damaging the frame and coming up with any sort of jerry-rigged solution, like getting a long threaded rod and some washers and trying to clamp the whole thing down just by tightening it up. Yeah, been there, done that, doesn't work. Plus, yeah, a headset press is about $150 if you buy a good one. Maybe $100 if you're buying a cheap knockoff one. And then that doesn't include such things as special cups for certain manufacturers' headsets, or if you're dealing with an internal headset or other complications. So, best bet, pay your LBS a little bit of money and they'll press it for you. And what that essentially involves is the upper and lower cups on the head tube itself, and then on the fork, the lower race that the bearings rub against. This one's a little bit more simple to do. It involves simply a tube that's a little bit larger diameter than the steering tube of your fork. The race is put on, that tube is after it, and it's slammed down until it's nice and tight and it has no more room to go anywhere. The rest of the installation process is fairly simple. There's a small amount of grease already on these cups, not really much because they're considered sealed. And aside from throwing your bike in the lake, not going to have much problem with water. The assembly goes together like so. I'm going to throw it here in the bike stand real quick so it doesn't go anywhere. And then we have the top race, which is equivalent to the piece that we slammed down on the crown of the fork. That goes on top. This one was always a little bit more difficult, particularly in this case because it has a rubberized seal. So as you press it down, it's not really going to go anywhere. Solution to getting that on, we have a simple hammer here. You can use anything, any type of hammer you really want, as long as there's some sort of padding so you're not going to damage the top race. In this case, this is rubberized, otherwise I'd use a piece of wood or something like that. This particular hammer, you can hear it, it's called a dead blow hammer. Basically the head is packed with lead shot. When you hit something, the shot goes from the far side of the hammer to the head where you hit it. The idea is there's no rebound because the shot in there forces all the energy in the direction that you're hitting. So line that all up, carefully not to hit our fingers. Give that some taps so it's on. And then just continue sliding it down. Until we get it in place. And then we're ready to move forward with that. Now, the other step, we'll move our camera down here to a little bit better position. As I said, general bearing assembly is the bottom bracket. Now, the bottom brackets nowadays, pretty simple designs in a lot of manufacturers. going with 2-piece cranksets. And so generally you have a crank arm. One crank arm has the axle that passes through the frame. The other crank arm clamps onto the axle that passed through, and all you need is a set of bearings, which is a cup with the bearing pressed in for either side. I've already pressed in the bearing on the far side, or rather tightened it in. These are not press fit, these are screwed in. And now I'm going to screw in this one. This guy here requires a specialized tool and a couple other specialized things. One, it's a titanium frame, so other metals that are in tight contact with the frame can gall and bind, or what's called cold weld, to the frame. So we really want to be careful of that. Ways of dealing with that are plumber's tape or an anti-seizing compound. You can kind of see kind of brownish, coppery-ish salve that I've smoothed around there. And that's just to keep it from welding to the frame. Since the cups here are aluminum, the frame is titanium, we can't have that problem. And you see here I'm threading this in a normal threading pattern, righty-tighty. Bottom bracket, important to remember, although you can always look it up in any manual or any video, is one of the 2 places on the entire bike where threads can be backwards. The reason being is that we want, basically, in this case, you're tightening it on, you're tightening it in the opposite direction of the way that the crank arms would actually be going. So this is already going to be tightened down to a very high torque to begin with. So it threads on in the opposite direction from the way that you would pedal. You're not going to get really any resistance on the bottom bracket if it's well maintained. So we don't need to have this threaded in the same direction. There's no concern that the bottom bracket is going to loosen over time. So that's the reason for that. The left-hand side of the bottom bracket, so it's threaded normal. The right-hand side is threaded reverse. So both of them would thread towards the back of the bike in order to tighten. To loosen, both of them thread towards the front of the bike. So we've tightened that on there a little bit snugly. Then we have a specialized tool to grab the notches that are on the bottom bracket itself. And then the tool simply goes over like that, and we can tighten it up. We clip the tool onto our torque wrench here. This is a inch-pounds torque wrench. You can get torque wrenches for centimeter pounds, meter pounds, foot pounds. Generally, for most stuff on a bicycle, inch pounds is sufficient. So, put that on. And you can actually see, there we go. That's as far as the meter goes on this torque wrench. So that should be more than tight enough. That went all the way up to 600 inch-pounds. So that's snug, to say the least. So that's set for the bottom bracket. And then all the rest of our bearing setup will be once we get a little bit more of the bike put together. I'll show you how the headset actually gets tightened down, lined up and everything. But for that, we like to have the handlebars on, the wheels on, everything else set up. So that's how to put the bearings into your bike.